Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 608. I'm the host of this show, Kyle Anzalone. We have some important news to get through on today's show, so be sure to share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. And if you're watching on any of those platforms, I really recommend that you at least subscribe to the show. If not, also hit the notification bell on YouTube, because if you don't, you're probably not going to see the show when a new episode comes out. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts, so anywhere you typically subscribe, just go ahead, find our show, subscribe to it. That way you don't miss an episode. We're always talking about news here, and so the best way to consume this show is probably by listening to every episode. And then, of course, you can follow me on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_, where not only do I post every episode of this show, but all the articles I write and other articles that I think are important. Let's get into it today. First story up here. Ukrainian official says Ukraine launched strikes on Russian territory with U.S.-provided rocket system. So on Tuesday, a member of the Ukrainian parliament told the New York Times that Ukraine had launched strikes on Russian territory using U.S.-provided HIMARS rocket systems after President Biden lifted restrictions on Kiev's use of the weapon. So the deputy chairman of the Ukrainian Parliament's Committee on National Security, Defense, and Intelligence claimed the strike destroyed S-300 and S-400 missile systems about 20 miles inside of Russia's Belgorod Oblast. Ukrainian's deputy prime minister also hinted that Ukraine hit Russian territory with Western-provided weapons. In a now-deleted post on Telegram, the official shared a picture of a burning S-300 system with a tag, "It's burning well. This is a Russian S-300 on Russian territory the first day after permission to use Western weapons on the enemy's territory." President Biden gave Ukraine the green light to hit Russian territory with U.S.-provided missiles last week, marking a significant escalation in the proxy war. If the claims are true, it marks a significant strike and a major risk of response from Russia. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg and other Western officials have shrugged off the risk of escalation, but Russian officials continue to issue warnings. On Monday, the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Ryabkov, urged the United States to heed President Vladimir Putin's warning against NATO-supported strikes inside Russia. "I would like to caution American officials against miscalculations which may have fatal consequences. For some unknown reason, they underestimate the seriousness of the rebuff they may receive." So that was a pretty striking escalation. Now let's talk about, why the U.S. is allowing for these escalations to happen. And it's that things are not going very well right now for the Ukrainians. This is from the Washington Post. Ukrainian soldiers receive insufficient training before frontline deployments. So the Post reports, Ukrainian field commander said that because training is so deficient, they often had to devote weeks to teaching the recruits basic skills such as how to shoot. This is from a 28-year-old deputy battalion commander from the 39th Mechanized Brigade who spoke with the Washington Post, said, "We have guys that don't even know how to disassemble and reassemble a gun." He said that he spent the first weeks with new soldiers transferred from the rear post, just making sure each one fires at least one box of bullets, some 1,500 shots daily before moving on to more complex tasks. Within weeks, these soldiers could be fighting near the embattled town of Chasiv, where Russian forces have been making advances. So the commander said, "We are just wasting a lot of time here on basic training. If God forbid there will be a breakthrough near Chasiv and we get new infantry that does not know basic things, they will be sent there just to die." With Kiev's forces critically understaffed and losing ground, the failure to provide adequate basic training for soldiers underscores the dire situation Kiev is facing more than 2 years after Moscow's invasion. To get troops to the battlefield immediately, Zelensky appointed military chief Colonel General Sersky has redeployed people who were previously serving in jobs such as guarding bridges and other strict infrastructure far from the combat zone to brigades engaged in some of the fiercest fighting. So this is a real problem for the Ukrainians that they're facing. And one of the solutions that the West has is, we'll send our soldiers to Ukraine to train the Ukrainian soldiers to get them ready to fight. The problem is that Russia says they will be targets. This from Dave DeCamp, June 4th, antiwar.com. Kremlin, Western troops in Ukraine have no immunity from Russian strikes. The Kremlin warned on Tuesday that there will be no immunity from Russian strikes for Western troop deployments to Ukraine to train Ukrainian forces, a warning that comes as France is preparing deployment. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov made the comments in a response to an op-ed by Lee Hofstadter that was published in the Washington Post on Monday. Hofstadter wrote that the Russian President Vladimir Putin might see hitting French troops if Russian forces can locate them, not only as a way to expose Western divisions, but also as a chance to humiliate Macron, now among the most hawkishly anti-Russian leaders. According to RT, Peskov said the fact is that any instructors who are involved in training the military of the Ukrainian regime do not have immunity, and it doesn't matter whether they are French or not. According to a report from Reuters, France might announce plans to deploy a few hundred military trainers to Ukraine following a meeting between Macron and the French President Zelensky on June 7th. So that's later this week. All the talk about potential French deployment has highlighted the fact that there's already a small number of NATO special operators inside Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov warned Tuesday that there were already indications of French trainers may be in the country and said they were legitimate targets. Lavrov explained, as for the issue of French instructors, I have grounds to think that there are quite a few specific facts that they are already working in Ukraine, regardless of whether they are considered to be servicemen from the French armed forces or simply mercenaries. They represent a legitimate target for our armed forces. And so this is concerning because, we could be talking about a World War III situation, and the U.S. and NATO are getting ready for it. This again, Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. NATO developing land corridors to rush U.S. troops to front lines in the event of war with Russia. NATO is developing multiple land corridors to rush U.S. troops and armored vehicles to the front lines of a potential future ground war with Russia and Eastern Europe, the Telegraph reported on Tuesday. Current NATO plans involve U.S. troops landing in ports in the Netherlands and then transported through Germany to Poland, but the alliance is looking to expand potential routes for U.S. troops to reach the borders of Ukraine and Russia. Officials told the Telegraph that they want troops to be able to travel through 5 different corridors. So 1, landing in the Netherlands and traveling through Germany to reach Poland. 2, landing in Italy, traveling through Slovenia and Slovakia to reach Hungary. 3, landing in Greece and traveling through Bulgaria to reach Romania. 4, landing in Turkey and traveling through Bulgaria to reach Romania. 5, landing in Norway and traveling through Sweden to reach Finland. The Telegraph report said that under NATO plans, U.S. troops and vehicles traveling through these countries would not be restricted by local laws so they could travel quickly. The report said France has complained about the tanks being stuck at foreign borders while trying to deploy them due to Romania due to the bureaucratic process. Starting in 2023, NATO has been working on war plans for a potential future conflict for Russia for the first time since the start of the Cold War. The alliance is playing for a possible ground war with Russia despite the obvious risk of any direct NATO-Russia clash quickly escalates into a nuclear exchange. And so this seems foolish for a couple of reasons. One, explaining these routes means that Russia is probably going to try to develop plans for them and to target them. 2, I think this could largely be worthless in the sense of by the time these troops really start to meaningfully mass on the Russian border, it could mean we're already at nuclear war. And the third point here I thought was interesting was the report said France has complained about its tanks being stuck at foreign borders while trying to deploy to Romania, which, I think suggests the fundamental problems with the NATO alliance. And that is when you have this massive block of 32 nations it's really easy for this to seem like a big and powerful body. However, when you look at the bureaucracy and how the war in Ukraine has been waged, I think that's probably hurt the Ukrainians. And here's just another example of how, this massive bureaucratic organization in NATO really isn't the strength of all of its members, but all of its members kind of getting in the way of each other. All right. This one here from the Libertarian Institute. I wrote it on June 4th. U.S. battle testing anti-drone weapon for war with Russia in Gaza. So the U.S. has deployed a new combat vehicle to Gaza with the aim of field testing the weapon for use in Ukraine, as the Pentagon hopes it will repel Russian drone attacks. Moscow's forces have made significant territorial gains in Ukraine, in part by overwhelming Kiev's air defenses. The Defense Department Station 2, and this is the name of the system: Mobile Low Slow Small Unmanned Aircraft Integrated Defeat Systems, or they call them MLIDs. So that's the simple name for them, in Gaza, starting in May. The Telegraph reported that, and this is from the Telegraph report, the U.S. Army sailed some of its coastal landing ships to Gaza as a part of the U.S. military's humanitarian flotilla. The ships carried one of the initial MLID vehicle sets, the outlet wrote, adding that at least one of the MLID's vehicles rolled down the pier and took up station at the end of the beach. The Telegraph describes the operations as a pre-war test for later use against Russia. Designed by the Pentagon in response to the war in Ukraine, the MLID is an anti-drone weapon which carries sensors and a 30mm chain gun mounted on multiple mine-resistant vehicles. And so I think the initial version of this, the one that they're field testing in Gaza, just includes two sets of vehicles. One is the anti-drone system that carries sensors, electronic warfare, GPS jamming, signal jamming, all of that. And then the second one is a vehicle that I guess has the 30mm chain cannon and would then, shoot down any drone that can't be jammed or redirected or something like that. Now, my understanding is they want ultimately this system to include at least a third or a fourth vehicle that would also have a missile launcher. I'm not sure if that's something that would be able to target where the drones are coming from, or to hit maybe larger drones that can't be taken down with the 30mm cannon. Not sure, but this is all very disturbing. So the MLID was part of Biden's $320 million aid pier for Gaza. While the president promised that the pier project would not require American boots on the ground, the MLIDs were photographed in very shallow water. Biden's pier has also proven far to be a disaster. The costs have skyrocketed. 3 U.S. troops have been injured. The pier was dislodged by mild weather, and it delivered a minimal amount of aid to Gaza in the few days it was active. Additionally, the MLIDs were deployed in coordination with the Israeli military, appearing to bolster the case that Washington is responsible for Israeli war crimes in Gaza. The International Court of Justice has ruled that it is plausible that Israel has committed acts of genocide in the territory, and the separate International Criminal Court has indicted the Israeli Prime Minister and the Defense Minister for war crimes carried out against the Palestinian people. So it's just absolutely disgusting to use the site of a genocide to test our weapons. All right, just to understand the seriousness of what's going on inside of Gaza, it doesn't get more hard to talk about than this. Child cancer patients suffer in Gaza with no treatments available. So this is from Reuters. It says Sarja Yassan, a 10-year-old, is rolled into the overcrowded Gaza hospital ward in a wheelchair, his light green t-shirt dwarfing his skinny frame since leukemia in his blood wrecked his immune system, sapped his strength, and left him unable to walk. Chemotherapy would help him, his doctors say, but he can't get it in Gaza, and he can't get out of the enclave for treatment now that Israeli forces have shut down the only exit through the Rafah crossing into Egypt. So this is what the boy said. 2 weeks ago, I stopped being able to walk. Every day my condition gets worse and I lose something. My bones hurt and everything hurts. I wish to leave Gaza so I can receive the treatment and be able to play like I used to. The Alaska Martyrs Hospital is one of the only hospitals still functioning in Gaza, where most of the medical system has been destroyed by Israel's 8-month-old assault. Residents flock here for basic medical treatment. In Deir al-Bala, the central Gaza Strip, the last city the Israeli forces have yet to storm. But doctors say they are helpless to treat seriously ill patients like the 10-year-old boy and can no longer send them out of the enclave for treatment since Israel launched this offensive of Gaza last month, shutting down the only pedestrian crossing. All they could give the boy in Gaza is drugs for the pain. This is from one of his doctors. His case is one of hundreds of cases, whether cancer or meningitis cases or chronic or acute cases. We have a lot of children who are in need of receiving treatment abroad, and it's so terrible that we're doing so much to allow this to continue to happen. All right, this is really a really crazy admission. This is from Dave DeCamp, wrote it up at antiwar.com on June 4th. Biden. People have every reason to believe Netanyahu is prolonging the war in Gaza to stay in power. So, President Biden has said that people have every reason to believe that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is prolonging the Israeli onslaught in Gaza for his own political survival. The president has made comments in an interview with Time magazine where he was asked, some in Israel have suggested that Netanyahu is prolonging the war for his own political self-preservation. Do you believe that? Biden replied, I'm not going to comment on that. There is every reason for people to draw that conclusion. Polling has shown that the majority of Israelis want Netanyahu to resign once the war in Gaza is over, so any pause in the Israeli military operations would increase domestic pressure on him. Biden comments reflect a February report from NBC News that said the president previously expressed that Netanyahu wants to drag this war on so he can remain in power. Despite holding the view that that view of the Israeli leader, Biden has continued to provide military and diplomatic support for Netanyahu's genocidal campaign in Gaza. Other reports have said U.S. officials believe Netanyahu might view a wider regional war as the key to his political survival, but the U.S. is still backing Israel after it bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Biden unveiled a ceasefire proposal on Friday and said he would lead an end to the Israeli military operations in Gaza, but Netanyahu quickly rebuked him by saying a permanent ceasefire was a non-starter. Israeli officials believe Netanyahu's comments may sabotage the chances of reaching a ceasefire deal with Hamas. And so, I think there's a couple things to point out here. One, it's just sick of what the American policy is, given what we know. It would almost be better if Biden really was this incompetent senile oaf that really can't remember what happened or what's been happening for the past 8 months. And so every day, Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan really have to talk to him and explain this all to him. And he just really does. But he does seem to get that, this is absolutely as cynical as we explained to you on this show. Biden knows it. He just doesn't care. It doesn't change his policy. Now, the other thing I want to point out that I didn't point out on yesterday's show, and I think this is important. It's the last line of Dave's article here. Israeli officials believe Netanyahu's comments might sabotage the chances of reaching a deal with Hamas. Now, I think this is the concern of Israeli officials, because there's this, the problem I think they see is if they take the ceasefire deal, it's not necessarily that they think it's going to lead to a permanent ceasefire. What they think is that they're probably going to get 40, maybe 50 hostages back. Hamas will keep a small number of male soldiers that were captured and still in decent health within Gaza, but everybody else will be released. And so I think the problem that the Israeli officials recognize is that it may be hard to restart the war at that point. There's only a few people left. They're all soldiers. And after a few weeks of pause, there's going to be, I think, significant pressure not to restart the war. However, I think what these officials are saying when they say Netanyahu's comments might sabotage the chances of reaching a deal, they were talking about that they liked that this deal had a lot of ambiguity, which means that, it starts off with this 6-week pause in fighting where there's going to be this hostage exchange. And what the Israeli officials, I think, are saying is, listen, Netanyahu should shut up here, take the deal, and then once we get, the first bunch of hostages back, we'll just restart the military campaign. And so I think the real debate is whether to lie to the Palestinians with the hopes that you'll be able to restart the military campaign, or just keep it going and push forward with it, which seems to be what the Israelis are doing. All right, next up here, U.S.-Israel signed $3 billion deal for Israel to receive 25 F-35 fighter jets. So the U.S. and Israel on Tuesday signed a deal that will provide Israel with 25 new Lockheed Martin-made F-35 fighter jets, demonstrating staunch U.S. support for Israel amid the slaughter and starvation of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Israel's defense minister said the deal is worth $3 billion and will be financed by the U.S. military aid that the U.S. provides to Israel. The U.S. provides Israel with at least $3.8 billion in military aid each year, and President Biden recently signed a bill that will give Israel an additional $17 billion in military aid. The new fighter jets will start being delivered to Israel in 2028 and will bring Israel's total fleet of F-35s to 75. According to the Times of Israel, 39 out of the 50 F-35 fighter jets that were a part of an earlier deal have been delivered so far. Israel first announced its intention to procure 25 F-35s from the U.S. back in July of 2023. The U.S. is also working to push forward a separate deal that will give Israel 25 F-15 fighter jets. While the President Biden recently warned he could withhold certain heavy bomb shipments to Israel over its attack on Rafah, he hasn't imposed any consequences, as Israel has continued to escalate in the city and massacred civilians in a tent camp with U.S.-provided bombs. When making the warning, Biden also vowed long-term military support would not change, and administration officials said Israel would get every penny of the new $17 billion in military aid. All right, next up here, this one from Responsible Statecraft. House votes to sanction ICC over arrest warrant for Israeli leaders. So, in a vote of 247 to 155, the House passed a bill that would impose sanctions on anyone who assists the ICC, the International Criminal Court, in its investigation of Israel's conduct in Gaza, a group that includes U.S. allies like Germany and Japan that fund the tribunal. The bill, titled the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act, aims to punish the ICC for its chief prosecutor's recent decision to seek arrest warrants against several leaders from Israel and Hamas, including Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. More than 40 Democrats joined Republicans to back the proposal despite opposition from the Biden administration. The bill faces an uphill battle in the Democrat-controlled Senate, would also sanction immediate family members of those targeted. The sanctions include bans on entering the U.S. and doing business with American companies or citizens. So Representative Chip Roy, a Republican from Texas and lead sponsor of the legislation, said, "We cannot stand by and allow the court to do what it is doing." He argues the proposal would send a strong message to the international community that the United States will not be politicized cases against itself or its allies. Representative Guy Rushleiter, a Republican from Pennsylvania, said, "This is a kangaroo court. Another to defend to defend an institution that is anti-American, anti-Israel, and anti-Semitic." The vote came just a day after the Biden administration announced it opposed the bill. The administration, This is a White House statement. There is more effective ways to defend Israel, preserve U.S. position on the ICC, and promote international justice and accountability. The administration stands ready to work with Congress on these options. And so the White House is open to imposing some sanctions on the court. The problem that the White House has is they're trying to work with the court on prosecuting Vladimir Putin for the war in Ukraine. So they had this very careful balance where they have to condemn the court in one case and, elevate it and assist it in the other. All right, this next story from the New Arab. Israel's extremist national security minister Ben-Gvir threatens to storm sacred Al-Aqsa Mosque. So the New Arab reports Israel's extremist national security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has threatened to storm the sacred Al-Aqsa Mosque on Wednesday during a provocative flag march through Jerusalem. Israeli settlers are due to celebrate Jerusalem Day, the anniversary of their capture of Palestinian East Jerusalem during the 1967 Arab-Israel War on Wednesday. Israeli settlers and extremists marked the event by marching through Palestinian areas of the city while waving Israeli flags in a deliberate provocation. The day is also often marked by assaults on Palestinian people and properties as well as other provocations. Ben-Gvir, who has a history of violent incitement against Palestinians, told the Israeli Army radio that the march was planned to pass through the Muslim Quarter and the Damascus Gate in the Old City in East Jerusalem. So this could really ignite tensions in Israel between its Arab population, the Palestinians in the West Bank, not just what's happening in Gaza. All right, last up here, it looks like we're getting a potential major escalation in Lebanon. This from Jason Ditz, antiwar.com, June 4th. Reports suggest Israel is gearing up for Lebanon war. Tensions continue to rise on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, and there are reports of Israel's work cabinet discussing a full-scale war against Lebanon. Hezbollah and Israel have been fighting almost daily since October, with nearly consistent Israeli airstrikes against southern Lebanon. The U.S. and France have been trying to negotiate a settlement to see the attacks stopped by both sides, and Hezbollah moved back from the Litani River. Israel's national security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir doesn't want to wait for a deal. Visiting the north today, this would be on Tuesday, I believe, to inspect the damage from rocket fire, Ben-Gvir insisted that Israel's military duty is now to destroy Hezbollah. Britain recently warned Lebanon that the likelihood of an immediate Israeli attack in mid-June and the start of a war whose geographic expansion and duration would be unknown. Qatar has also spoken up, expressing concern about Israel's intentions in Lebanon, saying it does not believe Israel wants a ceasefire. Following Ben-Gvir's comments, this seems like a realistic take on the situation, at least given the current Israeli government. While a mid-June date is not far away, it should be remembered that Israel mentioned numerous deadlines for starting a war in the winter and spring. The U.S. has repeatedly warned Israel that watching a concurrent war in Lebanon in tandem with the conflict going on in Gaza would stretch Israel's resources too far. Israeli officials dismissed the idea that they'd be stretched thin by multiple full-scale wars on their borders, and military officials have repeatedly expressed readiness for the conflict. So that is very concerning. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for today. We will have at least one more show this week on Friday. I am going to try to get a show out to you Thursday morning. Just looking at my schedule right now, I don't know if that's going to be possible. I will do my best, but if there's no show Thursday, there will definitely be a longer show on Friday. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Back with more later in the week.